Welcome, everyone. Thanks for taking the time to join us today for our webinar. There are two of us here today, myself, Alex, and my colleague, Anna. Anna is a part of our customer success team, and she trains new customers to make sure they're comfortable using BigRoad. We'll be running this webinar together. Some drivers choose to work together and drive as a team in order to cover more ground and deliver loads faster. BigRoad easily accommodates team driving with a few simple steps. This webinar will show you how to properly team drive using the BigRoad mobile app with or without DashLink, as well as some tips and tricks to keep things running smoothly. As a bonus, we're also going to cover yard move and personal conveyance settings because we always get a lot of questions about these special driving events. Before we get started, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. If you submitted questions with your webinar registration, we've done our best to answer them throughout the presentation. If you do have questions during the presentation, you can enter them into the question box on your GoToWebinar control panel. This question box is located in the lower right-hand side of the window. At the end of the webinar, we'll open the floor for a question and answer session, and during this time, we'll answer the questions you've submitted. I'll be sending out an email tomorrow that includes a full recording of today's webinar. That way you can watch it again or share it with your team. Okay, let's get started. Here's what we'll cover in today's webinar. First, we'll talk briefly about what team driving is and why you might want to use it. Then we'll talk about when to use yard move and personal conveyance. Then we'll dive right into a live training demo led by Anna. She's going to show you how to use team driving properly within the app, as well as some tips and tricks to keep things running smoothly. She's also going to quickly show you how to enable or use yard move and personal conveyance. So what is team driving? It's when two drivers share driving responsibilities with the same vehicle. Each driver takes a turn rotating between on-duty and off-duty. It's important to know that the FMCSA rules are the same for team drivers as they are for solo drivers in terms of how many hours you can drive at a time and how much rest you're required to take before driving again. Team driving just means that drivers can use their on-duty time strategically so that when one driver has to go off-duty, the other can continue driving. The benefit of team driving is that having an extra person in the cab means longer hours on the road and more miles covered. Longer hours means a quicker turnaround time for load delivery, which many carriers appreciate. However, it's important to remember that if you do choose to team drive, you are going to be spending a lot of time in a confined space with another driver, so make sure you choose someone who you get along with. It's also very important to use team driving properly in order to avoid violations and fines. So there's a lot of confusion around the use of personal conveyance, and the FMCSA has recently released some new proposed guidelines. Previously, personal conveyance could only be used for those times when a driver was off-duty, driving their vehicle, and their vehicle was completely unladen. However, this caused problems for some drivers. For example, what if the driver was off-duty but carrying work equipment with them for the next day's work? Previously, this would have meant the driver could not use personal conveyance because their vehicle was not unladen. But in their new proposed guidelines, the FMCSA is focusing on the driver's duty status rather than whether or not their vehicle was unladen. This change would allow drivers to use their vehicle off-duty, for example, when they're driving to their motel, a vehicle stop, or to a restaurant from their lodging. Drivers would also be permitted to commute to their personal residence, then back to their last on-duty location, for example, their terminal, trailer drop-off location, or work site. The FMCSA is currently offering a comment period where you can add your thoughts about this proposed change. The deadline to submit your comments is February 20th, 2018. I'll be including a link to this comment form in the follow-up email that I'm going to send to all of you after the webinar. So yard move is designed for those moments when you're moving your vehicle, but you're not really driving. An example of this is when you've been asked to move a few meters in a parking lot, or you're picking up a load and you need to get a bit closer to the loading dock. When you use the yard move feature, you will still be logged as on duty. However, the time you spend in yard move will not cut into your available drive time. With BigRoad, you can use yard move for 5 miles at a time with no maximum speed. So I'm going to pass it over to Anna now for a live demo where she's going to show you more about team driving, personal conveyance, and yard move.
Okay. So if you're not aware, we actually have a team driving guide available on our website. If you go to BigRoad.com and then to our resources page, under our ELD resources, we've got a team driving guide. That's actually what I'm going to use to follow along here for my example. And you can also feel free to, pass that along to your drivers if you're a fleet manager, or, download it, print it off, whatever, if you're a driver. So the basic rule of thumb for team driving, and this is kind of what it all boils down to, is only having one driver signed into BigRoad at a time. So you can do this, whether you're sharing a phone or a tablet, or even if each driver has their own mobile device. That's the most important thing to remember. Because number one, DashLink can only connect to one device at a time properly via Bluetooth. It can't connect to both. So that's one reason that you want to have one driver signed in at a time, so that DashLink isn't trying to hop between both devices. If they're both signed in, DashLink will try to connect to both of them, and basically it won't properly connect to either. And secondly, this allows for the odometer readings and the mileage on the trip sheet and the jurisdictional mileage to all be passed cleanly between the two drivers instead of, doubling up where it shouldn't be. So that's going to be a best practice. So let's assume that you've got driver A and driver B in this truck, and driver A is, driver B is going into the sleeper berth now, and driver A is about to take the wheel. So the driver will have been, either in the driving status or in the on-duty status. What driver B would want to do in this example is go to their duty status wheel, select sleeper, and when you are team driving, it is mandatory to put your co-driver's name on your log. So to do that, go into your daily log. So let's go into daily logs and then view logs, and we'll open up today's log. And now your team driver is going to be on the header section. So click over here on header, and then just right here you'll find your co-driver name. So select pick co-driver, and that's going to pull up a list of all of the drivers in your fleet, and you'll find your team driver's name there. If you accidentally pick the wrong one, you can just hit remove co-driver and then pick the other person. Pretty simple. We're just going to scroll down to the bottom of the page now and hit done. That's going to save that change. And then back on the home page, we've already gone into the sleeper berth, so what we want to do now is just sign out of the app. Now, if you're going into sleeper, that's okay. If you get this prompt, it's just going to say, do you want to go off duty? It's up to you. You probably, technically, when you're in the sleeper, I think FMCSA likes to see that logged as sleeper versus off duty. But you could go off duty, go on duty. Really doesn't matter. Whatever status you're in when you sign out, it's going to keep you in that status until you sign back in. So if you're like a coach, coaching your team driver, and you're technically required to be on duty while you're in the passenger seat, just leave yourself on duty before you sign out. So at this point in time, it would be driver driver A's turn to sign in. So driver A is going to sign into the app. They're going to pick their truck, connect to DashLink. You can go ahead and do your pre-trip inspection at this time. But driver A also needs to go ahead and add their co-driver to their log if they haven't done that already. And they can go on duty. If you're going to go into your pre-trip, or if you're going to do your pre-trip, you can do that in the daily logs button. And once you're connected to DashLink, you can go ahead and start driving. And this cycle just repeats, as you guys are taking turns driving. So if I could summarize team driving down to two really important steps, I'd say number one is to add your co-driver, and number two is to only have one driver signed in at a time. And I'm just going to check our question panel here to see if we have any questions. So you guys just give me a quick sec. Okay, so Jill says, when a driver goes into sleeper, do they have to select no truck and let driver A select the truck number? No. Once they're signed out of the app, then they're signed out of the app. So they don't need to switch over to no truck or anything like that. They can stay, they can leave their truck here at the top of their log. Once they're signed out of the app, then, their logbook isn't really doing anything with that truck, and the other person can sign in and select that truck. Signing out is going to, allow one person to be logging that that time that's at the wheel, logging that mileage and connecting to the DashLink. Lauren asks, can they choose no truck and stay signed into the app? Technically speaking, I guess they could, but I still don't think that would be best practice, because later on, while they're still signed into the app, essentially, that jurisdictional mileage is going to be recorded for that driver on their trip sheet information. So basically, let's say that they stay signed into the app while the other driver is behind the wheel. The driver B, who's not driving, is maybe just riding for 150 miles or 200 miles or whatever. Those 200 miles are still going to be recorded on that driver's trip sheet for that day under that jurisdiction. It won't be recorded for that specific truck number, but on their trip sheet it will be recorded under no truck. So really I would recommend signing out. It's going to be best practice so that you're not adding extra mileage to that driver's trip sheet that technically isn't theirs, if you know what I mean.
Just looking through some questions here.
Sorry, I have a list of questions in front of me that I'm reading through. All right. Robert asks, do they both have to do driver inspection before starting? I believe that's yes. I think both drivers have to do a pre-trip at the start of their shift. I know typically anyone in a non-team driving situation would be required to do an inspection, before they drive the truck. So I believe, to my knowledge anyways, that's still the case with team driving. Each driver needs to do a pre-trip before their shift. Carmen asks, when my team drivers are trying to choose their team driver, it doesn't give them the list of drivers. It only shows the office personnel names. How can I fix this so they can see all the drivers as well? I've actually heard this from some other customers. And I think this might be a bug that we're working on fixing. But if your drivers aren't seeing the co-drivers in their pick list, go into the fleet settings, Carmen, and turn on driver-to-driver messaging on your fleet settings. I believe that's what gives them the option to pick their co-driver from that list. Joanne asks, can they both use the same iPad but with different sign-ons? Yep, absolutely. In a lot of cases, carriers tend to think that's easier so that the drivers don't accidentally stay signed in at the same time while doing team driving, so you can definitely do that. Okay. Okay, so just to make sure we have enough time for personal conveyance and yard move, let me go ahead and show you guys how a driver can go about using those features here. And I'm going to start with yard move. Now, something important to specify regarding yard move is the difference between AOBRD and ELD. Not only does the feature behave a little bit differently for the two, but the FMCSA rules are different for AOBRD and ELD. So my emulator here is set up as an ELD right now. So I'm going to show you ELD first. Specific thing about yard moves with ELD is that right now FMCSA rules say that yard move can only be used under on duty, not driving. There are no off-duty yard moves when you're running ELD. So when you're running ELD, to perform a yard move, it's very similar to AOBRD. You want to go into your duty status wheel here and select Start a Yard Move. And then it's going to open up an event called Special Driving Mode. When you're running ELD, Special Driving Mode is just the moniker that FMCSA gives to these, personal conveyance and yard move, because they're not straightforward driving, like as in 11 hours of drive time throughout the day. So it's going to create a special driving mode and is going to require a note. So let's just say, for example, I'm at the customer's location. I just need to pull up to the dock. So I'll just hit save. And you can see it's starting, it started me in yard move. It's got me on duty. So I'm actually just going to simulate driving here. And you can drive this at, normal speed. This doesn't have to be done, below 5 miles per hour or anything like that. And with ELD, we don't put a distance limit on the yard move. So that's another difference between AOBRD and ELD. With AOBRD, each instance of yard move has a max of 5 miles. Now you can use multiple yard moves if you need to, but with ELD there is no max on it. There's no cap, so you can stay in it as long or far as you need to. But it is going to be logged as on duty, not driving. So once you've stopped the truck, you can click your duty status wheel here and then select end yard move. And then it'll just take you out of yard move and put you back into on duty. If you actually go into your logbook, yard moves are recorded as auto-recorded events. So auto-recorded events are part of ELD. These are just background things that the DashLink records because ELDs, to be compliant, are legally required to capture certain engine events and display them on the log. So yard move shows up as an auto-recorded event. Called special driving mode just here. And it'll say special driving mode cleared. Now with AOBRD, yard moves are very similar. You'll still go to the duty status wheel and select start a yard move, but it'll basically pull up a box that says yard move in progress, and it'll count you down from 5 miles. And then once you're done, you can stop the truck and select end yard move. Now, yard move under AOBRD can be logged as off-duty, sleeper, or on-duty. So AOBRD is a little bit more flexible with that feature there. Hopefully the FMCSA decides to ease up on that rule about no off-duty yard moves for ELD, but at this time that's what the requirement is, so that's how DashLink, is obligated to behave. Now with AOBRD, yard move is kind of like phantom time, or that's kind of what I call it. It's just going to be logged as whatever status the driver's in before they start their yard move. Under AOBRD, there's nothing on the log that says like special driving mode or yard move or anything like that. And then let's talk about personal conveyance too. Personal conveyance is going to behave the same way on AOBRD versus ELD. So what you want to do is no matter what status you're in, you can select begin personal use. Again, if you're ELD, this is going to pull up special driving mode. And it's going to require a note. And that's going to put you into off duty if you haven't already gone off duty. And you'll see this little line here saying personal. If you don't see that line that indicates personal use, if you just start driving, it's going to move you into the drive line. So make sure that you select start or begin personal use. And then you can start driving. And then it'll keep you in off duty. So we don't have a max time limit or a max distance on this. We really just expect drivers to keep it within reason, make sure that you're using it, responsibly, so to speak. And once you arrive at your destination, it's very similar to yard move. You can just stop the truck, select your duty status wheel, and select end personal use. On your graph, when you use personal conveyance, we're going to add an extra line down here that says PC. And I'm not sure if you can see it or not because it's a really tiny little section of time, but we're going to shade this area in green as well. So we do put it on the graph where you did personal conveyance. That's the same for AOBRD and ELD. And then on ELD, much like the yard move, personal conveyance will show up here as a special driving mode on the auto-recorded event. And let me check our question panel here. So Edward asks, we have a sister plant less than half a mile away. We transfer trailers back and forth. Will this be considered a yard move? One thing that I didn't mention is that yard moves, are usually okay if you're like on a customer's site or some kind of private property. If you're going to be getting on a highway, then no, that really wouldn't classify as a yard move under FMCSA rules. So for this particular question, even though the sister plant might be within the yard move distance, we wouldn't advise using yard move if you're going to be getting on a public roadway, because that's really not within the FMCSA's definition of a yard move. And one other thing to note about these features is that if the drivers aren't seeing these options, then you want to make sure that you've enabled them on the fleet settings page if you're a fleet administrator. So personal use, your drivers won't see until you turn that on your fleet settings page in the web app. Same goes with yard move, but with yard move, they also have to be connected to a dash link to see it. So if they aren't connected to a dash link, like if they're just sitting in the office playing around with the app and they don't see it, or if they don't have their Bluetooth turned on, then they won't see start a yard move until they're connected to dash link. And I'm pretty sure I have some time, so why don't I show you in the web app where you can turn these features on. So to turn on yard move and personal conveyance for your fleet, just navigate over to the fleet tab here, and then on the settings page, select edit. And then you can turn those features on here. With yard move, we do give you a blurb about, that stuff that I covered about the difference between AOBRD and ELD, as well as making sure that you're not using these special driving modes on public roadways. And for the person who is asking about their drivers not being able to see their pick list of other drivers, this is where you can turn on driver-to-driver chat so that they can pick their co-driver. So I've had a couple people saying something along the lines of the truck not having a sleeper. So if the truck doesn't have a sleeper, then I guess you would just select off duty. If the driver's going to be off duty and not, getting paid for that time or not considered on shift, that should be perfectly fine. You can always double check with your local DOT if you have a specific situation that you have further questions about. But also, again, on duty, you can log that as on duty as well. Whatever status the driver leaves themselves in when they sign out, it's going to continue to keep them in that status. So it's okay if they're going on duty and then signing out. That's totally acceptable legally to do. It'll also prevent them from having issues with the dashlink connection or with the odometer information passing cleanly. You want to have, with the odometer, you want to have the ending odometer, let's say from driver A at the end of their shift. You want that to be the starting odometer for driver B on their log. So you want that pass to be nice and clean, which signing out of the app when it's not your turn to drive will accomplish, basically. So yeah, lots of questions about that. I don't believe the second driver has to go into the sleeper. They would just at least have to go off duty. Deb says, what if your driver is getting paid when they're not driving? I would assume that they would need to log that as on duty. Technically, any time that they are required to be, on shift or on dispatch, or if they're not entirely relieved of all work responsibilities, that time technically has to be logged as on duty. I don't know what the pay situation is at each company, but by FMCSA standards, if a driver is relieved of all work responsibilities, technically they would go off duty. If they're on the clock, then they can log on duty. The question here from Nathan says the rider is being paid, so they need to be on duty. Question is, does the driver have to log their rider as a partner or not? I believe the answer to that is yes. If you've got another driver, if you're taking turns driving, if that's the situation, then that would be considered team driving. And I am pretty positive that they would still have to be logged as a co-driver. Again, you might want to just double check with DOT or send a follow-up question to our support team. But yeah, that sounds like team driving to me, in which case you need to go ahead and add the co-driver. So we have a question here that says, do I need to stop before transferring from yard move to regular driving? So if you're AOBRD, then if you start a yard move and you just keep driving and you exceed the 5 miles, it'll put you in the drive mode, and I don't believe that it will log that time as yard move. So you want to make sure that you do stop and end the yard move before you start driving again. Same thing with ELD. Always make sure that you end the yard move when you're done with that driving mode. If you leave yourself in yard move, then all of that time will be recorded. If you're in ELD anyways, all of that time will be recorded as special driving mode, which wouldn't be the case if you just forgot to end yard move and then kept driving for the next 2 hours under yard move. Now you wouldn't want to do that. So yeah, make sure you end your yard move. There's a question here that says, how long time-wise are you allowed to be on a yard move status? There is no time limit to yard move. It's with AOBRD, it's kind of more of a distance thing. With ELD, there really are no restrictions to time or distance. So, if you're sitting in an oil field, well, I guess if you're sitting in an oil field waiting, then you'd be in that status. But if you're, waiting in line at the fuel lines or waiting, for a trailer to be loaded or whatever situation, if you need to stay in yard move for a while, that's fine. I have seen customers do it for like an hour and a half, I think. It's probably the longest I've ever seen them stay in yard move. It's really more about just not, if you're on AOBRD, not exceeding the 5 miles per yard move, or on ELD, making sure that you're, staying within the rules. So doing this on private property and not, actually going on public roadway. And there's an interesting kind of statement from Carol saying under an ELD, you can still switch driving to personal conveyance if it was accidentally added as driving, say from yard to home. And that is true. So let's say that you forget to log a yard move or a personal conveyance, and it's recorded as drive time. And I'm going to do that now, just to show you an example. So I started driving and it's got me in drive mode. And oops, I forgot to select yard move before I started driving. I'm going to go into my logbook. Go to view logs. I'm going to find that driving event here. I'm going to select it and click edit. And I can switch this over to off-duty driving or yard move still. Just make sure when you do that you are leaving a note because that requires a note. So that was a good point, Carol. Thanks for bringing that up. So it seems like we're getting quite a few questions about, or that kind of have to do with the rules of personal conveyance, like when is it acceptable and when is it not. Currently, the three main rules of personal conveyance is that you have to be unladen, so no load, no trailer even. You have to be totally off the clock, completely relieved of all work responsibilities. So you're not on dispatch, you're not getting paid, I guess. You're not responsible for any kind of work. And then number 3 is that you have, you're going somewhere personal in nature. So maybe you're going to the truck stop or you're going home. Those are pretty much the 3 main rules of thumb for personal conveyance. So if your situation fits into those rules, then I would go ahead and say, yeah, I think that would be acceptable for personal conveyance. If you're iffy on any of those parameters, then maybe reach out to DOT and say, hey, this is my situation. What do you think here? You never want to cause DOT to raise an eyebrow by your use of personal conveyance, right? So never hurts to check with them too, or give us a call and we'll be happy to provide any answers we can. But that seems to be a lot of questions that we're getting here. We do have actually a blog on BigRoad's website about personal conveyance. I'm not sure which page it's on our blog, but if you just Google like BigRoad personal conveyance, we do have a blog that actually states all the rules for personal conveyance. So that would probably be a good resource for you to look up. Sorry guys, I'm just reading through some of the questions here. So there are some questions saying, why is ELD different than AOBRD? Like if you forget to select yard move. AOBRD is, generally more flexible than ELD with editing. So if you forget to select yard move, with AOBRD, hypothetically speaking, you would only be using yard move for an on-duty, off-duty, or sleeper event. With AOBRD, you can still go back and change the status for so let's say that you forgot to log it as off-duty. You can still go back and switch it to off-duty. Also, AOBRD does allow for more flexible editing of drive time. So if you forget to select yard move, then the safety manager can go in and switch that driving event to a non-driving event. So if you forget to select yard move and that records, a minute of drive time, the safety manager can go back in later and switch that driving status over to, on duty or off duty and put a note saying driver forgot to log yard move. With ELD, you can't do that. You can't switch a driving event into a non-driving event. So that's why there's that distinction there. So we're getting some comments saying you can only change recorded drive time to personal conveyance. I believe that's the case in the mobile app, but as a safety manager with AOBRD, the safety manager can still go in and change drive time to a non-driving event, unless our team has changed that recently, which I don't believe they have. But we can certainly follow up on that. Definitely don't want to give any misinformation, so maybe shoot us a question if you want us to follow up on that. So there's a question here that says, what should my drivers do if they're looking for somewhere to park and they end up going over drive time? Technically speaking, that's a tough one. FMCSA tends to be pretty strict about that stuff. They would say that's too bad. Driver should have planned it better. I don't want to sound harsh, but that's usually their stance on stuff like that. So you want to be sure as much as possible that the drivers are planning ahead so they're not, looking for a parking spot when they've only got, 2 minutes left for the day or something like that. If that does happen, then probably your best bet is to just make a remark on the log that says, went over because I was looking for a parking spot at the truck stop. It would still put that violation on their logbook, and it would show them as going over a couple minutes. It's kind of up to the DOT officer who sees that in a roadside inspection or an auditor if they want to, let that go, if they want to be, lenient on it. But as much as you can, try to, plan ahead for that kind of stuff, because FMCSA or DOT is not obligated to be lenient, and a lot of times it seems like they're not, like they're pretty strict on that from what I hear from customers out in the field. So yeah, you want to plan ahead as much as you can. Okay, so looks like we have a question that came in before the webinar that says how to add another driver to be available for team now and then. So if you need to add a driver to the fleet, you can do that in the web app just by going over here to the fleet tab and inviting a user. Now, if you have seasonal drivers that you maybe don't drive all the time, or they're off, they're not working for long periods of time, you could remove them from the fleet, which would store them here in the removed users section and free up a license for you, and then re-invite them back into the fleet later on. We have some customers who have seasonal drivers, and instead of paying for a license for each of them to always stay on the fleet, they'll just buy enough licenses and then kind of juggle their drivers around like that, which you can do. But if you're trying to add someone to the fleet and you're getting that message that says you've reached your limit of users, then either you'll need to remove someone from the fleet to free up a license, or give your account manager a call and have them add an extra license to your fleet subscription. We have another question that came in before the webinar that says, how can I put the info using the same iPhone or tablet for a team driver using the same truck? I have an Apple tablet I want to install permanently. So, Luis, if you're signed in here, you want to make sure that you only set up one truck number for that truck. And then you want to give each driver their own, login, so their own user account. And then they're just going to take turns signing in and signing out, really. And there's a question from Michelle that says, if a customer keeps you until your time is out and you can't stay on property, how much time can you still show to find safe haven? I don't know the answer to that one, unfortunately, Michelle. I would maybe shoot our support team an email and see if they can do some research on that for you, or maybe reach out to DOT. Because I personally don't. I've never heard of there being an extra stipulation for finding safe haven, so that's not something that I personally know of. So feel free to reach out to our support team. We might be able to find an answer for you for that one. All right, so keep sending some questions in if you still have them, because we've got a couple more minutes. Nicole says, when a driver forgets to log out of BigRoad over the weekend and the miles add up over the weekend and exception shows, how do I delete those miles? Can I delete an exception? We're not able to actually delete mileage that shows up on a driver's trip sheet. So if you're doing your mileage report, in that case, probably the best way to get them out of get them out is basically just to manually subtract them from your totals. That's why we always say it's really important for drivers to log out of their shift or log out of the app when they're done with each shift, so that it's not recording mileage for them while they're on their personal time, because any mileage that's recorded will go into the vehicle mileage report. So, if they're already in there, then yeah, just go ahead and go back to that trip sheet for those days and subtract those miles out of your report manually. And then I would really, really encourage your drivers to sign out of the app when they're done with each shift. This is going to be especially important if they're using their own devices. Charlie asks, do I need to have BigRoad home screen up all the time? That's a good question. We do recommend that you keep the BigRoad app open and in the foreground, at least while you're driving. That's one of our best practices that we stress a lot with our customers here. I mean, when you're driving, you're going to be locked on either the home screen or the hours of service page. That's just, feature of the app. But you do want to make sure that you don't background the app by minimizing it or closing it down. The reason for this is that when you background an app, essentially what the phone or the tablet does is it says, okay, that app's in the background, it's less important, so I'm going to dedicate less of my resources to it. So it's your phone or your tablet's going to divert resources away from whatever's in the background and put that to whatever's in the foreground. And this is true of any app, not just BigRoad. This is just something that phones and tablets do. So while you're driving especially, make sure you have the BigRoad app open. Don't close it down. That way the app is getting, the full power of your phone. It's going to be checking your GPS location about once a minute and updating that. It'll keep your Bluetooth connection stronger when you background an app. Especially when you're connected to DashLink, you don't want to lose those resources from the phone because that can affect your Bluetooth stability.
Okay, and I think we're going to wrap this up here. So again, just so everyone knows, tomorrow you will be receiving a follow-up email that includes a full recording of this webinar, so you can watch it again or share it with your other people on your team. But thank you guys so much for attending, and have a great day.